Good evening and welcome to this Super Tuesday version of the Norfolk Select Board meeting. My name is Kevin Calcutt. I am joined by my fellow board members Jim Lehan and Anita Mecklenburg. Let's kick our meeting off in the same way as we normally do with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Justin, would you mind taking us through our agenda this evening?
Yes, Mr. Chair. This evening, the board's going to consider approving the fiscal year 25 water enterprise fund rates. We're skipping over item number 3. We have a proposed charge change for the Fire Station Building Committee, consideration of the donation of a bench for Town Hill, clean and green event on town-wide, approving a road event for the Norfolk Community League's fun run, approving the use of Town Hill for Easter Sunday service. We're skipping over item number 9 this evening. We'll have a second quarter financial update, do a presentation on the fiscal year 25 budget, and then have a planning overall budget update, planning update for town, as well as a discussion about tri-county next steps, and then updates.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. All right, so our first item this evening is our public comment period. This gives anybody who would like to join the board 3 minutes or so to share anything within the scope of the board or the town administrator. So at this time, we'll open it up. Is anybody interested in public comment? Looks like that's a hard no. Moving on to item number 2, vote to approve the FY25 Water Enterprise Fund rates. Justin.
Yes, as the board's aware, we had a hearing now some length of time ago, but last week we continued that hearing. The board did receive some comments. We have our DPW director here if there's anything you guys further want to discuss. I do want to just say that, after our last meeting, I want to reiterate, we go through a robust sort of budget process for DPW. They had a third-party consultant, the Abrams Group, which is utilized in many municipalities throughout town. I think there were some prudent points made by the comments, but I think I think the DPW has laid out a case for why we recommended these rates, and we'll have Blair come up if there's any questions the board wants to ask or talk about regarding our last meeting.
Very good. Welcome, Blair.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.
So I imagine you had the opportunity to watch the engagement at the last meeting. We did allow Mr. Bakanowski a little bit of time to go through his very comprehensive remarks back. I think Barry did a good job of highlighting the perspective of DPW, but just generally speaking, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think, to extend upon what Justin was talking about, that, when we sit down this is not a subject that we take lightly, nor should we. It's something that we spend an awful lot of time on for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, the health of the water fund going forward is extremely important. The health of the water department today is extremely important. There are aspects in the economy and what residents pay for water. There's a lot of pieces that go into it. So when we had, in the early stages, when we sat down to look at this, the reason why I wanted to have a third party involved was so that it wasn't just my opinion. So that somebody who was detached from Norfolk, someone who does this for a living, could take an unobscured view of our water system and to come up with what they believed, and that might have, realizing that might have coincided with my thoughts. It may not have. But I wanted that to be an independent review of where they thought we stood based on the past data that we have, plus what's coming down the pipe for what we may have to deal with going forward. So the Abrahams Group did a good job. I believe that they were thorough in their investigation of what they looked at. They do this for a lot of other cities and towns. So they came to the table with a solid resume. And, we're in the same ballpark as far as recommendation moving forward. Not to say there isn't a lot of work to do, and I believe that with the water system, there will always be work to do. Regardless, it's something that, is a moving target on any given day. There's federal regulations, there are physical conditions with water, there a lot of residents moving into town, building. There's just a lot of aspects when it comes to water. It affects a good majority of the town. So it's something that we never take lightly. A lot of time goes into it, and when we look at the water rates, that's the basis of everything it is that we do. So certainly share some of Mr. Bakanowski's concerns, but I believe that at this point, at this snapshot in time, I think we're covered.
Thank you.
And so I recommend that, and I had taken your comments the last time I was here into consideration about the capital plan, and I would like to adjust that to stay flat with where it was last year, as opposed to dropping it to 5% that the Abraham Group had recommended. So
I appreciate that.
I think that all things considered, I think staying with flat rates across the board for another year, I think we'll certainly take another look again next year. In the past, we had gone 3 or 4 years before really taking an outside look. Considering where things are, PFAS is obviously going to be an ongoing issue for years to come here, where we're going to tiptoe around it. We're in a really good place compared to a lot of communities around us. We have a pretty good, pretty nice source in Holbrook Street, and Gold Street's in pretty good shape. So from that perspective, we're doing much better than those around us. But I think that on a yearly basis, we're going to have to take a much harder look than we ever have to make sure that we stay current and that surprises don't pop up and get us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Questions from the board? Anita?
I don't have any further questions. I felt like when I was a principal, elementary principal, I always felt like when sometimes the public came in and having that outside view of what's going on inside your organization, even if you don't agree with it or even if you do, is really valuable. So I'm really grateful to Mr. Bakanowski for the time and energy he put in, but I trust the process that you've gone through, and I don't have any further questions at this time.
Thank you. Jim?
Not really a question, but a comment. First, thank you for adjusting that. You have challenges that you don't even know about yet, which is one of the intriguing parts of your job. But I'm supportive of what you're doing. I do think that we're going to have to really look at some longer-term solutions to some of these issues, because they're going to have things imposed on you that you're not going to have any control on. We
Correct.
both know it's coming, and or you know better than I that it's coming. But I appreciate your making that adjustment. So no, I have no other questions.
Okay.
And I'm good as well. So thank you very much, Blair. Truly appreciate all the time, effort, and presentation. And at this time, I will accept a motion to approve the FY25 water enterprise rates.
So moved.
Second.
Justin, point of order, do we need to specifically highlight the rates we can identify as printed? That's fine?
As printed in the agenda background.
Gotcha.
Yes.
And that was with the
Yes.
capital improvement fee? Okay.
Yes.
So friendly amendment, thank you, Blair. Friendly amendment to include the water rates as printed in the agenda for the meeting. Do I hear a second on the motion on the floor?
An additional friendly amendment, just to be sure that there's clarity on that he's keeping the capital flat.
Yeah, I think they listed it here. That's
Just to
staying
make sure.
flat. Yep.
Agreed.
And seconded.
Hearing a second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye, and that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Item number 3 was to appoint an associate member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. We're going to be skipping over that tonight because the gentleman was unable to attend, and we did have some questions before we went through with that appointment, so we'll be pushing that to our next meeting. Is that correct, Justin?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Very good, on the 19th. So moving on to item number 4, Fire Station Building Committee membership charge change. Go right ahead, Justin.
Yes. The Fire Station Building Committee, obviously people can see the work we're doing on the fire station, and the committee has been meeting every month. However, we've had a long-term vacancy, a vacancy that's been there even before I came on the town, with the town, and, it's caused some quorum issues when scheduling some meetings. So, we've discussed with the chair, and we suggest that just changing it from 8 members to 7 members, just removing that one vacancy, it would help with our scheduling. Nothing else within the charge would change.
Very good. And I imagine that we have tried to advertise for the position in every way, shape, and form. We simply have just not gotten the interest, especially given the relative downtick in information and work to be done there on the committee right before that. I see something blow over while we're saying that. Yeah, that being said, that sounds pretty reasonable from my perspective, but I'll open it up from questions from the board. Jim?
It's reasonable, but does it violate any of our bylaws?
No.
No, I'm fine.
I only have a comment is I was reading through the packet and I was like, well, what's the harm in keeping it open? And then the whole thing about the quorum, the packet was really thorough and very helpful, so thank you for that. And I have no questions.
Very good. Well, in that case, I would take a motion to approve the charge change once again as listed in the agenda for the meeting.
I would just say, yeah, just from reducing from 8 members to 7. It should be a motion.
I move to change the the fire station building committee from 8 members to 7 members.
Second.
Is that what you're asking, Chester?
Yeah, and just 4 members would be from the community. Before it was 5, so it would just be 5 members moving from 5 members to 4
Are we
members.
removing a position from a specific spot?
No, it's just a residential position.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with a friendly amendment to highlight that the reduction in committee membership is from the resident pool
Correct.
of members, do we hear a second on the motion?
Second. Oh,
Well,
Jim made the motion.
I'll second the
Anita
motion.
seconds it. Do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. We're going to get one of these motions down before the end of the meeting,
It's
I
hard to
promise.
confuse when there are only 3 of us.
Our next item this evening is to vote to accept the donation of a bench to Town Hill by the Norfolk Lions. Justin.
Yes, in the board's packet, you have some information regarding a memorial bench that the Norfolk Lions is considering gifting to the town. They're going to work with our DPW director, Mr. Blair Crane, on the placement and the installation, but Mr. Turry is here to talk about the bench. And
And if you have any questions, it's in honor of Scott Dietrich, who was a resident for a long time, very active in the community, especially in the Lions. He founded the Community Day and really believed in the community. And what the Lions would like to do is honor him by putting a granite bench up on Town Hill, inscribed with basically that information.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, David, for attending to give us some background and offering to answer any questions that we may have.
No problem.
I don't have any questions from my end. I'll open it up to the rest of the board. Anita?
No, I think it's lovely. Thank you.
Jim?
Scott was a dear personal friend. As a Lion, this is one situation I will not recuse myself from. I want the privilege of voting for that.
Justin, anything else before we take a vote to accept?
I would just add one other thing. We've gotten another request for a bench within town, and so we're working with. We've kind of had a few one-offs of different benches. So Kate O'Brien, our assistant town administrator, is working with our departments and coming up with a bench policy because some of these are a little different than what we've typically had. So hopefully in our forthcoming meeting, if the board thinks it's prudent to do that, we'll have a bench policy for your consideration moving forward. But other than that, nothing else to add to this one.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you very much again, David.
You're welcome.
At this time, I'll accept a motion to accept the gift of the memorial bench from the Norfolk Lions and authorize its installation on Town Hill.
I move that we accept the donation of the bench by the Norfolk Town Lions and that bench will be installed on Town Hill. Thank you.
Second.
Hearing a second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye, and that is a unanimous vote. Thanks once
Thank you,
again,
board.
David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item this evening is to vote to approve the Norfolk Range's 15th Annual Clean and Green Townwide Cleanup on Saturday, April 6, 2024. Justin.
As the chair mentioned, this is the 15th annual Clean and Green event. This group reached out to our DPW. DPW is willing to provide the dumpster with the board's approval, and there are no concerns. We just need to get the board's approval for this event.
No questions from my end. Jim, any questions?
Nope, no questions on my end.
No,
Other
it's a-
than why I didn't turn my phone off. My apologies.
No questions.
Yep, absolutely. In that case, I will accept a motion to approve the event.
I move that we approve the Norfolk Range's 15th Annual Clean and Green Townwide Cleanup on Saturday, April 6th, and to authorize the provision of a dumpster for trash removal.
Second.
Hearing a second, further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And that is another unanimous vote. Thank you. Our next item this evening is to vote to approve a road event for the Norfolk Community League's Fun Run on June 9th, 2024, from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Justin, anything additional?
No, all of our public safety review event, there are no public safety concerns. And just for the public who may see this, it was listed in the agenda as June 6th. It's actually going to be on June 9th from 9 to 11 a.m. And they are working with Lieutenant Van Ness on a detail for that event as well.
Is this still in coordination with Community Day, or is this on a different weekend now?
I believe it is a different weekend.
I
now.
believe it's a different.
Yeah, it's a different weekend.
Gotcha. Because it was with Community Day before, now not. Got it. No other questions from my end? Jim?
Nope.
None.
Anita? In that case, I will accept a motion to approve.
I vote to approve, I move to approve the road event of the Norfolk Community League's Fun Run on June 6, 2024, from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m.
Friendly amendment for June 9th, not the 6th,
Yep.
but
Second.
hearing that second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Another unanimous vote. Thank you.
I did not read that wrong.
You did not. It was
No.
changed in mine.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
You picked it up.
You were.
I picked mine up too soon. Oh, well,
thank
all
you.
right. That'll probably happen again. Okay.
Our next item this evening is to vote to approve the use of Town Hill for the Federated Church's Easter Sunday service on March 31st, 2024, from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Anything else, Justin?
No, just another annual event. No public safety concerns from our public safety staff.
I do hope the weather is better than it was today.
Yes. Easter's early this year.
Any questions, Anita?
No.
Jim?
No.
In that case, I will accept a motion to approve the use of Town Hill for the event.
I move that we approve the use of Town Hill for the Federated Church Easter Sunday service on March 31st, 2024, from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m.
As a member and officer of the church, I would ask you to second, and I will recuse myself.
I second that motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 I recuse.
And with one recusal, that is a two-person unanimous vote. Moving on to our discussion items this evening. Our first one is going to be skipped over while we get a more comprehensive outline of our warrant articles. So this will be on our 19th agenda as well, Justin?
Yes, and working with town council, it should actually be the entire warrant as well. It just
Beautiful.
won't be a list.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That brings us to item number 10, which is going to be our second quarter financial update with Mr. Lindmark. Justin, you want to lead us in while Todd makes his way up?
This is just our sort of process, update our quarterly financial updates. Todd's provided a comprehensive list for the board, and I think it reflects the changes that the board had wanted to see as part of the financial update.
Good evening, sir. How are we doing tonight?
Excellent.
Playing multiple roles today, huh? Jumping back and forth? I was just over there. They were very eager to have you back over there
I'm sure they are.
Oh, Finance
It's a
Committee.
long night.
at the polls. Take it away, sir.
Oh, sure. So, as I've done in quarters past, prepared the review sheets, one for the revenues, and then one for the overall revenues with expenses for the general fund. Looking at the revenues, I hate to say it, seems like a broken record, but we're on track. The couple of exceptions, in the investment income, you'll notice we have about 254,000 of investment
like
income.
crazy.
And that's in large part to our working with the banks. Obviously, we had the monies from the fire station that we received. They've been doing drawdowns, but they haven't been doing them as quickly as they have. In any event, we've had the money in the bank, and instead of just letting it sit there at peanuts, we have it at about 3.75% interest. So that's what's attributing to those additional monies, which has helped out quite a bit. So doing that, plus also some other monies. We're at the tail end of getting our reimbursements with FEMA, so that's probably going to be about another $600,000 coming from there as well. Most of the other line items pretty much match up with what anticipated for the current year. The motor excise vehicles, as of December 31st, the motor vehicle excise that are received are only for the years previous. They're not for the current year. Current year bills go out in February and in January for February. We had $1.6 million for motor vehicle going out as of January 25th. And to date, we've collected over $1.2 million of that. So that's going to significantly improve the revenues in that particular line item. And like I said, the other line items are pretty much lining up where I expect. So that kind of covers the revenues. I'm not sure if you had any questions on the revenues themselves.
I did not have any questions on revenue. You answered my 2 questions on the motor vehicle and on the investment line. Anita, any other questions?
No other questions?
Jim?
And then moving to the second sheet, top portion is revenues, which we've already discussed. I've identified, the motor vehicle with the commitment that come in. Moving into the expenditures, again, everything is pretty much lining up where it needs to be. Public Works is a little bit lower, but that doesn't account for the snow and ice expense. Right now, adding another $206,000 to that amount for the snow and ice expense to date. We are budget spending, or deficit spending at the moment. We're just a hair over the $250,000 that we've allocated for that account. We don't expect too much more, hopefully. But you never know with the snow in New England. April 1st still hasn't come yet. The debt amounts, and I'm also prepared, and I apologize because I just did this today. I'm going to give it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck.
So, go back to my microphone. So the first page is our debt within the budget and the particular items, and then it dovetails in with the expected payment dates. So we have July, August, September, October, January, February, and so forth. So we've made a good portion of the payments already through the year as of December, but we still have some payments being made for January, February, and then majority of it's going to be in April. Second page is the exempt debt. Included in that exempt debt is going to be the interest for the fire station, and that's $600,000 coming from the general fund amounts to cover the interest for the $18 million bond payment that we had this year. I also have about a little over $200,000 that was part of the premium from the bond issuance that will also go for that interest portion. So $200,000 is not being picked up by the general fund, which is a good thing. But again, the majority of the payments are March and April for those debt payments. Then the last page is just water debt. This is through the enterprise fund. And again, we have pretty much 2 payment series for them. It's either August, September, or February, March. So, and that's water. Those numbers are not included in the numbers I provided to you, but that's just I broke out the debt in total so you'd have a copy of it to see when we're making payments on that. Trying to give more information. So that kind of covers general government expenses, public safety, the education component. They're all right around the 50%, just shy of it. Benefits and insurance, as I've stated before, we pre-fund rather large amounts, especially with the retirement, which is actually funded July 1, which allows us to take a reduction in the amount that we actually pay for the entire year, because you can either take a reduced rate or make 2 payments for the entire amount. We take advantage of taking that savings and making the initial payment, so that's included in those numbers. Overall, where we're right now at, again, this is as of December 31st. So we're a little bit short by about $469,000. But again, we have the motor vehicles, which is $1.2 million. That'll go in right away to the revenue, plus all the other revenues. What's on the next quarterly report that I'll do in April for the May 31st quarterly update.
Todd, a question on the fire station.
Yes.
You're showing interest only and no principal. How did you ban that? What are you doing?
So we're going to be bonding that, as well as the water debt that was approved for the 3.2 million, which is the water meters and the water pipe that we're working on. 1.4 million for the water meters and 1.8 million for the water pipe. So 3.2 plus the 22.7. We're going out to bond I actually have a phone call with the bond agency on Monday, and then we're going to be having that issued shortly, let's see, April. They'll get the bids in, and we'll have that bonded for next year. And next year is when we'll have the principal and interest amount for that.
You're going to bond the whole thing?
Yep.
Have you considered short-term bonding? In other words, have you considered waiting it out, waiting the rates a little bit, just before you go to the full bit?
I guess I could. But I'll have to stop everything.
It's an interesting debate. I mean, interest rates are high. I think there's a reasonable expectation that in 2 or 3 years they'll be significantly lower. You don't think that might be worth taking a look?
I can certainly ask the question, but I think that, I think we'll get a pretty good rate, given the markets,
What do you think he'll get?
not over 5. But I can verify that with the phone call with the financial advisor.
Okay.
But I can certainly,
No, that's,
I can certainly reissue.
it's an interesting
Dan.
debate. There's, personally, I would, I'm not going to question Todd's judgment on that. He does a good.
Anita, do you have any questions?
I do not have any questions, thank you.
Sure.
The breakout's really interesting, thank you.
Yep.
High level, Todd, is there anything that you see here? I know that we got the kind of routine, everything's working to plan, which again speaks to your incredible ability to forecast.
Sure.
But outside of that, is there anything in here that gives you cause for concern, something that we need to keep an eye on more closely, or something that you think could roll up into a larger issue down the road?
So glad you brought up the word forecasting. We're actually in the process, and one of the items that was supposed to actually be on the agenda for tonight was the forecasting that we're working with the Collins Group on. We do have a product. It's never going to be finished because it's always a live document, shall we say. It's, utilizing what I expect. Justin and I had conversations. We've utilized past trends to come up with some analysis that kind of makes sense. Unfortunately, I don't see decreases or being level anywhere. I mean, our health rate, our health insurance was just renewed at 9.95. Last year was over 11%. That trend, I think, is going to continue. We have an older community with high usage of the plan. The 2 years of COVID where people didn't utilize the plan and we were able to get some savings there, I think hurt us. It was good that we were able to take advantage of some of those savings during that time period. However, they're catching back up with more people going in, getting more things done. People are having things identified that they would have had maybe taken earlier. There was discussion earlier today. We had a conversation with the IAC. How can the town of Norfolk bring the rates potentially down lower? So cause of concern from my understanding with the health insurance is it's going to keep going up. The only way you're not going to have it go up is if you don't use it and if you hire a bunch of young people. Knowing that's not going to happen, I'm very concerned about that on a going forward basis. Health insurance is a big amount of money, and each year it keeps going up. And we've been at the top for the past 2 years, and I don't expect that to go down either. KP, you're at a step up to the little wheel and spin it, and hopefully you get a good result one year, and then next year, who the heck knows? Because again, it goes based on numbers, and that fluctuates. That's another concern. We have Tri-County, kids going over there. If more kids go over there, they're paying a bigger amount. Norfolk Agricultural had more kids attending their schools this year than in years past. Hopefully this year it stays flat. But those are kind of a few of my concerns as far as the expenses are for the town. The forecasting, I think, once you go through and forecast and say, okay, here's what my anticipated revenues are, what my expenses that we think 3.5% across the board for most of general government. We know that school is going to be 6%, 5%, whatever for the various schools, and then throw in healthcare in there. we're not at a balanced budget when you look at the forecast. And unfortunately, we're going to have to play this game every year to say, how do we fill this up? Okay, so, you're going to have discussions tonight about the budget. Concerns are, if we're increasing revenues, that's less that you have available for free cash the following year because you're increasing the revenues to help patch up the budget. Utilizing one-times monies. Justin and I had this conversation all the time. You want to kind of get away from that. So once you use it, it's tough to get off of it. And, using free cash puts you at a deficit. So last year we used almost 1.1. This year we're going to be using almost 1. But what are we going to have next year?
Yeah.
I hope to have turnbacks like they've had in the past, but turnbacks get smaller and smaller the tighter that you get these expenses down within the budget. So every time you kind of trim your budget back in order to make the budgets pass, that just means potentially less turnbacks. And most departments, if not all departments, are very good about turnbacks. They're not out there spending, and we put the message out, be a little bit more careful. And I do see people putting more thought into the process of actually making purchases and not doing silly things. So the major concerns, healthcare, retirement was nice this year. It was only 2.3, I don't have the number in front of me, but 2.3% increase. So that's nice to know, but that's because markets have been good for them a little bit. Markets aren't as good, and we might have another 8 and 10% increase next year. So got to be worried about that. And then it's the outliers of the KP, the Norfolk County, and Tri-County. And then our Norfolk schools, because, they're a big player of the budget. They have needs too as well. And, you got to make sure that services are being provided for the townspeople in Norfolk, and make sure that they're kind of happy with a good product from the school, which I think we have. I don't think we should necessarily keep trimming to satisfy the problem. But I don't foresee you're only getting 2.5% each year.
Something's got to give at one point on that line, yeah.
New growth is good, but it has been going back a little bit, so don't have that either.
No.
Just be mindful, that's all.
Yep. And, and I appreciate that, thank you. And the reason why I ask is I believe as we have a goal as a board in Q2 to assess our moving forward and looking forward guidelines for the way that we address the budget, identifying some key indicator lines that we want to stick to, identifying some allotments that we want to try to make a routine moving forward. So having that kind of information is going to serve as a great basis for us to move forward with that kind of project. So thank you very much.
And, knowing that we have the stabilization fund, we should try and target making sure that particular fund has about 5% of the budget. The budget keeps going up, so we need to make sure that we keep that in line.
Yep.
And unfortunately, if the play is, well, you have plenty of plenty of monies in the stabilization fund, why don't we just use that? Well, that's going to impact the calls that I'm going to have on Monday if I don't have those funds available and they're
Right.
utilized for something else.
Understood.
Hopefully I wasn't too long-winded.
No, not even a little bit. Anita, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Jim?
Yeah, a couple of observations. When we look at the excluded debt, if my numbers are right, and I've worked around yours a little bit, I know yours are, I'm sure, you're looking at about $130 to the average $600,000 home in Norfolk, not the $500,000. I don't think we have any average $500,000 homes anymore in Norfolk. And then you've got on the fire station, on the fire station. And then you've got the potential of what we're going to do with Tri-County. When you look at what's coming off versus what's going on, and the potential of considering some expansions at the schools here, this excluded debt could be as much as a 20% increase on the average tax bill. In fact, my numbers are even close. It'd be closer to 25%. That is a huge increase in taxes. So we just have to be aware that while these are all nice to have, we are potentially looking at imposing some substantial, I mean, $26 million, $600 on the average tax bill. Tri-county, about 130. And if $40 or $50 million school expansion, you're looking at 1,200. That is about a 25% increase on the average tax bill on excluded debt. We just need to be, so those decisions need to be weighed. We have a lot of people in this town with fixed income. In fact, the master plan even specified that one of our fastest growing pieces of our population is the over 65 population. So the numbers are real, they're there. Most of it is already there, not much we can do about it. But I am concerned about that. I am concerned about the increase, the significant increase that is looming on our tax revenues within the next 2 years.
So 26 is KP's debt.
Because there's not much coming off. I mean, there's some coming off, but not a
Right.
lot.
No, but, so KP's is about.
The two the middle school and the high school come off, but their payments are low at this point. I mean, they're in the bottom end of a 20-year bond. So there's not a lot of, it's not a fair trade.
I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, oh, I know. You didn't, this,
I didn't create this
you
mess.
just run the numbers, I know, I know, I understand. But I am concerned about that.
But it never would be an even trade-off. By the time you get to the end of these bonds,
Not
the
expecting.
amount is so low that,
The point is, I never expected it to be an
Yeah.
even trade-off. The point is, we're putting on three significant, potentially, two for sure, potentially a third, that will have a significant impact on the tax bill. And we need to be aware of that.
Yep.
Two are given. We're already, we're looking at about a $650 to $700 increase on the average $650 home today, or next tax bill, next tax cycle.
In November.
So it is of concern to me, because I am concerned about a lot of our senior citizens that are sitting here on fixed income. You still have to do what you need to do to maintain our services and do all the right things, but we have to be cognizant of the financial impact of these decisions.
absolutely. All right. If nobody has anything else for Todd, thank you so much, sir.
Sure,
I know you want to get back over to the polls to finish up over there, so best of luck in that endeavor as well.
Thank you very much.
Truly appreciate the update, the comprehensive outline, and the ability to ask some questions. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Have a wonderful night.
All right, so let's jump down to our planning budget update. We'll invite Rich if you want to come up and give us a quick snapshot about what's going on in the planning department heading into our FY25 plan.
Thank you. In terms of the budget, first off, we've trimmed down expenses in terms of lowering costs to the overall budget. But in terms of trimming those costs, we really looked at some of the things to compare from the past in terms of where we think expenses would be to make those changes. So I say we made as much as we can good, smart decisions in those costs, not just to cut costs. That made sense. So in terms of the overall budget with negotiated contracts, our budget increase for the FY25 is projected at just under 2% with expenses and wages and salaries. So we did our share, as hopefully we can, try to trim costs. But at the same time, we're going to look at some of the fees that are charged or assessed for the different boards in terms of Board of Health, planning, zoning, conservation, et cetera, that we may need to make some adjustments to those. But I will say, as we look at those fees, you also have to be in mind some of the things you were discussing, some of those fees, some of the residents are coming in to do different things too. So we're trying to keep on par, but not, make sure we're not, have moderate, appropriate fee costs to do that. So we're going to be looking at that coming up. We haven't, the planning board made some adjustments a couple of years ago, and those zoning board of appeals will need to take a look at the fees. The 2 points, one adjustments that happened a couple of years ago is we took, previously, I know when you were on the board, advertisement costs were part of the filing fees. We separated that out, so that way, when you advertise for hearings, that's a separate charge that applicants have to pay. In doing that to try to keep costs in line with those, we advertise what we need, but not overly advertise in terms of cost to them. But those fees that come in are now strict, to the town. We're not, including that cost, which helps out a little bit. So that's where we're, in terms of budget-wise. Which is a good segue to talk about some of the planning things that are going on in terms of what's looking out in the horizon. As you know, we're in the midst of doing the master plan process right now. The plan is working towards the end where we'll be discussing implementation. The committee met on Monday, well, yesterday actually, and working towards coming up with some recommendations, but also recommendations that are right fit, so to speak, that they're achievable things, not completely aspirational that we can't do. And they'll be across the board in terms of different areas of the town. And then as part of that process, there'll be another public gathering to talk about some of those recommendations, the findings that we've gotten so far through the process. And then it'll be followed up with a comment period for people to weigh in on that. And then the recommendation from the start essentially was to have a committee that would oversee the planning effort after it's implemented, or adopted, excuse me, to make sure we're reaching those goals. And the plan will talk about some of the things the town has already achieved. So we're having what was done in 2007, some of the master plan goals. They're identified in this plan, some are carried forward, some are revisions, so that'll be part of the new master plan going, the one going forward. I'll segue over to MBTA zoning, which is obviously a front and foremost topic right now within the MBTA communities. The planning board has a public hearing next week on the proposed overlay district. There's two that are proposed, one for the center of town and one off for the Pondville area. They had putting together a presentation for the meeting, but also that we'll put on the website. Will go from when we started. The town hired Horsley & Witten was a consultant to help with the town to develop the districts and the requirements, but it'll go through that process from the beginning to where the planning board it would move forward with the recommendations in terms of those areas. And then the bylaw itself is what we drafted internally with staff and town council and the board. But that'll kind of lay it out in terms of what it is, what the requirements are. I'm also going to put in the presentation, as you know, actually probably literally about a year ago, last year, that originally the way and it was under housing choice bill that the MBTA community zoning was created, and as it's kind of come forward, keep inching forward. Last March was the AG said that it's not a choice. If towns don't comply with it, there'll be ramifications, and we're actually, see what more recently happened in Milton. So I think that really became a flashpoint for a lot of cities and towns when that came out last year. I think originally it was positioned it was something that if you adopt, there's grants that are tied to it and so forth. So I think the message then was that, it's more a stick and a carrot kind of thing, not more of a carrot than a stick. And now it's kind of morphed, if you will. So the presentation will talk about that a little bit in terms of what those ramifications are to comply versus not comply. It's up to the voters. I mean, obviously, it has to be adopted by town meeting. The plan is to move it forward for the May town meeting. There's two parts to it in our case. One is the overlay district. The second is the inclusionary bylaw. The present inclusionary bylaw exceeds the requirements that from the guidelines that were adopted for the MBTA zoning. The recommendation is to scale back to what it was before the citizen petition in 2021 that was put forth, which had it lower the number, but then escalated up to as high as 20% affordable for inclusionary after 19 dwelling units. We did the housing production plan last year, so 2023. And one of the recommendations in that plan, and this is kind of where the movement is to look at with that inclusionary bylaw, is to create some incentives to create affordable housing. The present bylaw is, if you have a development, you're taking away in terms of market rate housing and replacing it with affordable. And when you add in, acquisition costs, permitting and construction and so forth, it has created this effect, which the concern was all along, that it will push people away from zoning projects, conventional subdivisions or multifamily under the zoning bylaw to 40Bs. And we have seen that in actuality, because there is a proposed 40B off of Lawrence, but off of Cranberry Meadow Road and Eagle Drive. That once was an open space subdivision. And as you know, there's in terms of with Buckley Man site, there was issues related to contamination over there and the concerns about water and people having the wells. So that kind of weighted that down back then, which was pre the inclusionary bylaw. But now the developers are coming forward and they said, listen, if I'm going to do 20%, I might as well go to 25% and skip over your zoning bylaws, skip over your local regulations. So that has an impact. I mean, it does in terms of, one is we're going to, the potential to have more housing than we originally intended, the area. It also means that some of the protective measures we have as a community that we adopted bylaws, those can be waived. So the thought is that we want to relook at the inclusionary to create some incentives that we can get people back under the zoning that the town has adopted, and not trying to skirt around it by, and it's not just one single thing. So people will say to you, that's the straw. Well, it's not the straw. You kind of layer it up, and that weights different development projects down. And in terms of cost for development, we have the certifications that came back from the more recent 40Bs. They're not, while 40B is capped at 20%, developers aren't, when you cut expenses and revenues, they're not making the percentage that they once did. And they've said that to us. In the 80s, 90s, there was a significant profit margin that they would have, but over time that margin has shrunk. So all those variables are interplay. So one of the recommendations is to go back to the 10% for now. So we have the and again, up to the voters, but so we comply in terms of housing choice, and then go back in earnest and look at the bylaw, see if we can create some incentives. We have not had a subdivision in town. The last one was when you were on the board, which was previously. Every single family development has been a 40B here since I've been here, and they're all the previously projects. So in terms of developments through the zoning bylaw subdivision, they haven't happened in town more recently. And the concern is that that trend may continue unless we make some strategic decisions. So, and that's why I look at the inclusionary bylaw to take a harder look, and we'll see how that goes out. The next, I want to shift gears, which hopefully I feel like could be a positive light, is that Southwood Hospital. There, a couple things. in Southwell Hospital, we were made aware of some grant opportunities with the EPA to do some assessment. There's some money that can come in to help them with assessing the level of contamination and what the remediation was, which is something that's helpful. And that same assessment money is available, and we're looking at the Buckley Man property as well to see if we can get some EPA money to help assess the property to figure out a plan, what that cleanup is. But in terms of Southwood, GFI is looking more towards, the thought would be that more towards a non-residential development, almost a commerce industrial park set up with multiple buildings that would be, light manufacturing, commercial, industrial, as a option to redevelop that property, as opposed to some of the things that considered were residential related, higher density residential. They feel that there is a good market for that use. So there'll be more to come, but that's the thought is that might be a direction they would like to pursue, which in terms of from a revenue standpoint would obviously help the town because it would provide us a non-residential tax base, which clearly, through the master plan process in your meeting tonight, the town needs. And so they're looking at that. So there'll be more to come on that. The planning board had some public workshops with the zoning study, so there'll be meetings in the springtime to kind of circle back on that topic, but just to give you a kind of a forecast, if you will, where things might be headed. They're going to be working they have a PIP meeting that is GFI for Southwood coming up at the end of March, which will be towards the end of March. They're working on doing that now, but that's a project that could be a good life for the town in terms of a non-residential tax base. I mentioned about the assessment, the brownfield remediation, we're doing that. The other thing we have been working on, and we're making a little bit more progress, slowly, is a shift into the center of town. So we have met with different property owners in terms of development and redevelopment opportunities, and particularly the Stop and Shop site, which is AKA Stop and Shop site to the residents in town, but Eastern Development is the landowner. They have been more engaged with us in terms of trying to figure out a development plan. And we'll be working with them again in the planning board to try to figure out a development plan that works. There's the sewer there. I think they clearly understand now the sewer. Now that there's a sewer district, it's a first come, first served. So, you have to, they're more aware and hopefully more mindful of that somebody else could come along and tie in and take sewer away. So their attention is more, they are more focused on it now. Consider development options that the town would like to see. The sewer flow is not an enormous amount of sewer flow. So the scale of development is going to be on the smaller side. Yeah, it is more limited, okay? So important for folks at home, there is a limitation because it does need sewer to be developed. At the same time, there are the Dunkin' Donuts on Main Street has been interested over the years in terms of maybe extending sewer to their site for development. We've had more recent discussions with them and said to them that, I think it's time for you to think about it more seriously, because as time keeps moving, these other developments might become more feasible. In turn, they may lose out on that opportunity. And sewer for them does make development more workable in terms of the site, which I know the Lions might have to find a different location for the trees if they develop that piece of property they have. That's one downside, so to speak. But having sewer would help them for redeveloping the property. And they're looking at residential and commercial terms of use there. And so, we'll be working with them. And then we still are, as we're investigating, maybe going to MCI Norfolk to bring in some sewer flow to the center of town for redevelopment. And the sewer is important piece of the puzzle for them, a lot of the property owners, because with the stormwater regulations that are in place today, you can always put so much water in the ground on a piece of property. So those, stormwater competes with wastewater sometimes. So that's where the sewer can help some of the downtown properties in terms of redevelopment. So we're working on those. And the last two items that I'm working on, I'll just pause for questions, is the Medicom Greenway. We did submit for a design pilot. There's a good chance that we'll find out actually probably Thursday this week, because they're working towards making final recommendations on it. And then I'll be working with Park and Rec and Conservation on Open Space Recreation Plan update coming shortly. So that's kind of the 20,000 view perspective, I guess, some things going on in town. So free to answer any questions I can.
That's it?
That's it.
That's all you're working on? I mean, we appreciate the update, Rich. I know that a lot of these things that you're talking about have been long-standing projects. As you go back, I remember going through site plan review with the brothers and their plan for their site over there in that building, and the limitations that the septic made for them in terms of trying to get creative with that site. We've been talking about things like Stop and Shop and the master plan, the B1 zoning district, all these things forever. So it's great to hear that it's finally coming to fruition and finally becoming a cohesive plan where everything is intertwined and working together and aligned. So thank you so much for all your efforts associated to bringing that to the forefront. I think from my perspective, the biggest thing that you talked about there was this revitalized interest in the MBTA zoning. I know that with communities, especially in the general vicinity of ours, recently expressing their discontent with the requirements, there's been a lot of questions in our community about, well, what did we do to push back on these things? And, typically I think it's great for us to take a look back and highlight the fact that, we got word of this when we were going through the B1 changes in the first place over 4 years ago. We made accommodations for some of those requirements that were coming down the pike as part of that process. When we passed that zoning back in 2021, we included many of the things that we were told at the time by MAPC were going to be part of that new requirement. So a lot of this isn't new, and I appreciate the work that you and the rest of the planning board did to help us stay more proactive in being prepared for when those inevitable requirements did come down the pike. So we find ourselves coming into this town meeting where we're going to have a couple of warrant items that are just going to get us the rest of the way there, right? To build on the things that we've already done and to ensure that we fall within compliance. And, they fit within the vision that we've had from the get-go for what the B1 district looks like, including multifamily zoned housing in this area with mixed use, which, by the way, during the draft review guidelines, we were able to include our perspective about wanting to include mixed use development as part of this. And was able to get that change put in. So I feel good about the position that we're in right now. I just think that we're going to have to go through a little bit of a re-education process with individuals who are just jumping into it now, leveraging some of what they're seeing in other communities. And I just hope that we're prepared to be able to kind of take them through the back to front of how we got to where we are now and why we think that we're well positioned to be able to accommodate for those requirements moving forward.
Yeah, and which is tough is if you're now starting to tune into it, so people need to kind of catch up a little bit because, as you know, now the deadlines are becoming more real because we're in 2024,
Right.
all different communities. And the challenge about this MBTA zoning is that the zoning is prescribing what the zoning needs to say in terms of density and so forth. But not all zoning and not all development can be supported based on the land that's underneath and the other requirements, one of which is some of the within the center. Some of these properties are already developed. So unless you have a willing interest in terms of somebody that wants to sell their property, that's first. And then second, we do have a little bit of sewer, but the properties that are proposed in the overlay do not include sewer properties. So you have to rely on Title V in terms of wastewater. So in terms of being able to build it out, it's tough. It's like setting the table, and the table is really packed, which the zoning I look at as there's a lot that could happen. But yet, once you dig into it, there's properties that we look at that may just stay the way they are, quite frankly. You see there's condominiums that are in that proposed overlay district. There's housing already that's there, which is interesting in terms of, there are the critics who say, why allow that? Because that's already developed property. So this is kind of the back and forth. So we have the people on the one side saying, you're allowing that way, but yet that is what's permissible right now in terms of the criteria. So just what is excluded is not really developable property. So this building is, town hall's in it, but it's excluded, so it doesn't count. But so, yeah, we'll see where it goes. And I will say there are, in terms of what the PowerPoint presentation I have is, the money that the MassWorks grant that the town got for Lawrence Street, that's one specifically tied to this program. The money that we got to do the wastewater master plan for town center is specifically tied to compliance with housing choice. There are other ones that are discretionary grants that the town and other towns would be going for. Some of the work that DPW is trying to do on Seekonk Street, there's grants that could help, defray costs to the taxpayer, and I understand, to bring in outside money that could be in, and that's a choice. So, but those are sources that we go after to help offset costs for grants that we may not be able to go after. So there's a consequence to it. So it's choices. So, we'll see where it goes.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Anita, any questions, comments for Rich?
So just to kind of piggyback at first what you were saying, I remember when I was, two short stories, when I was getting signatures to run for reelection, I wanted to meet groups of people that were outside of my group already, of people in Norfolk, and one of the things I did is I walked along the commuter rail while people were waiting for the train and chatted with folks. And the MBTA zoning is definitely a place where there's a lot of interest and a lot of misinformation. And so I'm pleased to hear there's a public hearing. I think I'll ask my husband to go. Because he's like, do you hear about this thing in Milton? Norfolk should do something. I'm like, wait a minute. Norfolk is doing a lot of things for a long time. But anyway, so I think that's very exciting. I would want to make sure that MBTA happens in the umbrella of the master plan, right? That they can't be too, we have a tendency in Norfolk to get a little bit like this, and so making sure that we keep those projects connected, having the master plan umbrella and then the MBT zoning in there. And then I just had one question, going way back to the beginning of your conversation about fees, and you were talking about making sure our fees are on par. And when you talked about that, I think there is a place for raising fees as we're trying to do that. But are you talking about being on par with neighboring communities?
Yeah, neighboring community.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, within our area.
Excellent, because I say we is very generously with my pronouns, but really nice work in aligning our salaries for our employees and making sure we're offering a platform that's competitive and commensurate, is that the right word, with our surrounding towns. So the fees should be in line with that as well. So thank you for doing that work.
No problem. Thank you.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Jim.
I probably need to come and sit down with you, Rich. Otherwise, I'll keep you here for an hour and a half. I do have a lot of questions about this. And I know this has been a plan or a process that's been in place for a long time. Predates you. I remember doing a presentation in town meeting with the potential build-out of the B1 district and what we could and couldn't do and what it would look like. And we actually did a schematic of it and showed it in a video. And so, there are a lot of things, but this is very much like an old-fashioned decision-making tree. That if this happens, we go this way. If this doesn't happen, then we go that way, kind of thing. You're talking about sewer. If all of this land over here is developed, that sewer system was built with the idea of accommodating all of the development that would take place in this defined area. It wasn't built with the idea of anything expanding beyond that. Now, that is dependent on this being developed. If it's not developed, obviously it can be expanded. So there's a trade. if the right hand works, then the left hand doesn't. If the left hand works, the right hand doesn't. So all of those things are going to evolve over time. I do have some concerns about this inclusionary bylaw. And I have some concerns about what is proposed. We've been talking about mixed use in this town forever. And I hope that materializes. That's a good thing. I look at Millis, some other towns that have taken advantage of this, and they've done a great job with it. Great job with it. And it's productive and effective for the community if it's done right. Then I look at Walpole, and I look at that, and I say, that was not done right. So a lot of it is how we manage the process and how we utilize our opportunities to make sure that they're done in an effective way that fits where we are, who we are, and what our landscape needs to look like. It's got great potential, but it's fraught with a lot of bad turns if we're not careful. All for it. It's long overdue. 15 years we've been talking about this. But we have to be very careful. We have to really analyze, because every decision has a downstream implication. We all know that. And I just want us to be very careful in how we move through this, because mistakes can be costly. I mean, you drive down by that station down in Walpole. I'm sure you've been down there. I'm sure you've been down there too. I don't want that in Norfolk.
Yeah, and the planning that's gone into that.
Not because of necessarily how it looks. Let me preface that. It brings with it a lot of other issues as well. It's not just what the building looks like, and so on. It brings an enormous amount of considerations. Your schools, your infrastructure, all of those things have to be considered when you start looking at those considerations. Because the costs aren't isolated. They expand. They're broadened throughout the entire community. So all of that has to be carefully thought through. Wonderful things to do, but a caution flag goes up with me on some of these efforts, because we just need to be careful. We need to be sure that we think through the downstream implications of those decisions. All in favor of the direction, but I'm wary of that we have to be very careful of the outcome. I've just seen too many towns make too many mistakes.
And I think that's why we're working through in the sequence that we
I agree.
have.
I agree.
Going through a housing choice, housing production plan, then having that lead into a master plan process, and having that lead into the charging and economic development committee to be able to take on the marketing effort and see some of those requirements through. That's why we didn't just kind of do those things all at once back in 2021.
I'm not disputing that at all, Kevin.
Yeah.
I agree. There's been a lot of planning that's gone into this. I said it's an old conversation. This goes back 15, 20 years. And it's well-intended and well-directed, and you've done a lot of great work on it, Rich. As we move through, we're getting to the point where we're actually going to start making some meaningful decisions here.
Yes.
And not that we haven't, but I mean, from theory to fact is where we're starting to go now. And so the theory is wonderful, and we do all of those preliminary things. Fact's what makes a difference.
Yeah.
So it's those steps that we need to be carefully thought through and make sure we understand the downstream implications of those steps. So an enthusiastic watch out.
Yes. And I think that's why, as we talk about all this, is that the more we can create the bylaws and the regulations where development conforms to those, and that's how they develop, is really important to be able to do. That they don't try to go outside of what we've already put in place. And
A lot of good work has been done.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, absolutely, that's always in the forefront in terms of thought process with these things. Because
It's actually exciting to be in a position where there actually might be some concrete, meaningful steps forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Outside of just the conversation and planning process, which is important. That's
Oh, it
how
is,
you
yeah.
get to the point of making those decisions. But, it's an exciting opportunity for us. We just need to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
And is it 2 years left on that lease over here?
28.
28?
28.
I thought it was down to 2.
I thought it was lower as well.
I thought it was lower as well.
Are you sure?
I couldn't double check it for you.
Check it, 'cause I thought it was down to.
I thought two,
You,
I had two
I
in
think you and I
my,
both thought it was down
Two?
to 2 years. I think it's down to 2
I thought it
years.
was 26 as well, but I could be wrong.
I could as well.
It's been,
Well, I'll fact check it and get back to you. Huh?
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the comprehensive rundown, Rich, of everything that's going on. Obviously, like Jim mentioned, this is a very pivotal time coming up for the community in terms of
That's-
seeing
that's
some of
my
these
point.
things come to fruition. So Very exciting.
Yeah.
Maybe we could include, I'm sorry to interrupt you, maybe we could include the public hearings in our newsletter that's coming out. Or is it too late? We passed the deadline.
No, we're working on content for the
Excellent.
newsletter.
Great idea.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to add one thing. I appreciate Rich saying that we've obviously had a planning update associated with a planning budget update, but the board sort of reiterates something that Rich and I have talked a lot about because we're working hand in hand on this. We're coming to a point where we're going to be making some consequential decisions for the town. So we're going to try and have some more updates coming from plan as well, because obviously we have these meetings at planning board, but I think it's important that we have these conversations at the select board as well, select board meetings as well. So Rich will be appearing before the select board more because the board is absolutely right. We're getting to a point where there's a lot of different action items. I think there's a lot of opportunity for the town moving forward.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you very much.
Just seeing you more.
Huh?
I look forward to seeing you more.
You're a
We'll just
gracious
put your
man.
name on the chair and
You're-
everything.
You're a gracious man.
No, I don't, no need for the name of the chair. Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you
night,
very much, Rich. Take care.
All right, that brings us to our next item this evening, which is going to be a fiscal year 25 budget update. Justin.
Yes. So we've kind of done a piecemeal approach to this. We had Todd talk a bit about the budget during his revenue and quarter two updates, and we had Rich discuss it as well. In the board's packet, you have an overall budget summary sheet, and you have a PowerPoint. I'll run through my PowerPoint. I may summarize some things, and obviously, as the board has questions, interrupt me and so forth. The main difference in the budget summary sheet, Amanda, can you get a slide of it? The budget summary sheet is, when we initially gave you the budget summary sheet, there was a $1.5 million deficit. The summary sheet now has a $0 deficit. We have some recommendations for the board. So that's largely the biggest difference in that summary sheet. But I'll run through the PowerPoint first, and go from there. So on the first slide is just our revenue. We touched base on this slightly in the budget summary sheet, but this is just more centralized. The tax base is representing, 2.5%, Prop 2.5, new growth. You see our local receipts increase, our state aid figures. State aid is reflective of the governor's budget, as we discussed. In the other section is largely ARPA funds. Last year, as the board is aware, we used $944,000 of ARPA funds to help balance the budget. In 25, we have a proposal to reappropriate ARPA appropriation that I'll talk about a little bit later. And then I'm giving a sort of a preview to what helps balance our budget. Is our other proposal is to use $605,000 in free cash to help balance the budget. So essentially, with all these revenue proposals, it's a 3.6% increase. State aid, we talked about this in the last time we had the budget summary sheet, so there isn't much change here. These are reflective of the governor's budget figures. It's a 2.78% increase over fiscal year 24. This slide is reflective of town revenue adjustments. I'm particularly going to focus on local receipts. In the budget summary sheet that we had presented to the board, I did mention that we were going to look at some local receipt changes, acknowledging that, Todd and I talk about this a lot. When we adjust local receipts figures and we're aggressive in those figures, that has a cascading impact. Local receipts and revenue can lead to free cash. So in this year, we're proposing about almost 5.5% increase in local receipts. I think it's still judicious. We didn't go to the max that we could, but we are trying to be cautious, but also realizing that we had a pretty significant budget deficit. So these were the revenue local receipts that we did adjust, and it essentially led to about $212,000 in additional revenue. I'll pass over the ARPA monies and free cash for now, because we'll talk about that a little bit. So for revenue highlights, New growth continues to be strong for us. As Todd had mentioned, the real estate receipts are on track. Building permits are strong again this year. The governor's budget is reflective, both UGA and Chapter 70, it's 2.78%. I wanted to particularly highlight prison mitigation funds because last year, if we remember, we reduced it by $100,000 because we had, with no understanding and no explanation, reduction. And then this year we got additional prison mitigation funds, once again, with not an understanding and so forth. So we did increase the budget because we had to, almost, in a sense. And so I did want to point that out. And again, you'll see these notes, local receipts do have a ripple effect. They can lead to, reduced free cash in the following years and affect capital budget and transfers. They have a big impact on the town, and it's all connected. So we do want to keep highlighting these things. These are tough decisions we make, but they're decisions that we felt were prudent to balance the budget this year. Also, I've talked about this before. We're going to have various departments come in and talk about different fee increases. Rich talked about planning. I've asked Bob in the building department to look at comparable communities. The select board office is looking at fees, and the DPW is going to have a proposal for transfer station revenue as well. The next slide gives the overall increases in the general categories of government. If you'll see at the bottom, essentially is a 5.44% overall budget increase, and it's including exempt DEMP, but our subtotal is about 3.5%. You'll notice public safety, a 5% increase, and we can talk about that when departments come in, but obviously benefits as well. That's another large increase for the town as well, which is about 5.6%.
Is that the Quinn bill?
For public safety, it's largely based on police and the MEC assessment. And yes, for police, I'll have Chief Hines come talk about that, but it is largely off of Quinn. We have a lot of officers who've gotten more education.
Which is good.
Which is good,
Yep.
but that is a large driver in the budget this year, as well as the MEC assessment. If you look at the next slide, overall, all 4 districts, education, it's about 3.4%. It's almost $900,000. And if you think about the revenue that we had, if you look at generally new revenue that we have, it's largely already taken up by education. And I think that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later on and what some of the challenges are for us moving forward. But the MEC assessment, we talked about this last year. This was the, last year was the final year where we got 25% grant from the state for the MEC. So this is the full impact of the MEC, a MEC assessment. Moving forward, we won't see these as, hopefully, and not hopefully, we won't see as large of these jumps in future years, but this is the last year of that, so it's about $100,000. Norfolk County retirements of $70,000. It's lower than what we had last year, it's about 2.32%. As Todd had mentioned earlier, medical insurance, we're at the highest rate again this year, and that led to about $260,000 in budget costs. Public safety, police, fire, $220,000. And then excluded debt, as we had talked about before, that's a large jump for the community, about $1,075,000.
Yeah, it's interesting that the medical rates for Norfolk are almost twice what the medical rates are for KP.
Yeah, so I can't speak to KP's.
I mean, it's based on experience.
Yeah.
I mean, it is what it is.
I was gonna
But
say,
it's twice as much.
Right. So Norfolk, as Todd had mentioned earlier, especially particularly the COVID, a lot of municipalities saw this. There were some savings that were realized, and then emerging out of COVID, the town's rates have been generally higher. We've had, over 117%. So one of the good things about being in Maya is that you have these other communities that can offset a little bit of that. You have some of these high claims that we've had, they tend to roll off, but we're at the highest rates possible. So it is a challenge for us. It's something that we are taking a look at, seeing how we can offer options and benefit options to our employees. But this is probably line with the demographic of the employees of the town, as Todd had mentioned earlier.
I think with the schools too, there's a really low turnover rate.
Yes.
Which is really exciting, and it's really positive for the schools, but it ends up with an older population, which then shows up in other places.
Yes. The next slide, it's just a high-level look at some of the town reductions that we have. I think you're going to get more information when we have departments come speak to you about their departments. But I did want to highlight, there were significant reductions that were made. Some of them are expansion requests. Some are, actual, fiscal year 24 budgets that were reduced even further. So there's a mixture of these things. So I wanted to put a concise chart there for you all to see some of the budget reductions that occurred for this fiscal year 25 budget. And I've encouraged all of our departments to, when they meet with you all, to talk about them, some of the challenges they may pose, et cetera. The next slide is sort of a high-level snapshot of the Norfolk Public School appropriation because they haven't had their budget public hearing just yet. But I did meet with Ingrid and the budget subcommittee. They last week they met and voted to approve an increased budget of 4%, which reflects an increase of $603,465 over fiscal year 24 budget. They also requested that the full committee approve the use of $125,000 in special education stabilization funds. Ingrid and I have spoken about this. We were aligned that we thought this was a year that, because of special ed costs, et cetera, this would be a good year to utilize this special ed stabilization fund. Essentially, if they do decide to do that, it will reflect a reduction of $125,000 on the budget summary page, which is already reflected in that. And that essentially makes a 4% budget look like a 3.2% budget in the budget summary pages. And just for general information, Norfolk Public Schools, the school committee will have a public hearing regarding their budget on March 12th at 7 p.m. I think this will give you an opportunity to hear about some of the challenges they face and some of the budget decisions they've had to make.
Justin, does that include the cost of a new ELA program?
Their proposal includes about half for the ELA program.
And the rest will be capital?
We'll talk about it. More than likely,
Got
it'll
it.
be
Okay.
capital.
Thank you.
Yes. We're trying to, and I don't want to speak for Norfolk Public School, but I know their intent is to try and look for grants as well. But, if there's no grant opportunities, then I think that's something that we're probably going to look in capital as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The next slide is a new slide that I think is important for all stakeholders to have. It's understanding of some of the ancillary costs that are included in Norfolk Public Schools. It's been talked about, and I think it's better rather than just talking about it, people understand what those costs are that are included in town budget that's not included in the direct appropriation for Norfolk Public Schools. And I'll particularly focus on the second element of it, the additional school-related expenses. So for facilities, all of the elementary maintenance is included in the town operating budget. It's within the facilities department. So when Matt Malnerich speaks about his department, he'll talk about some of those things, and particularly he'll talk about the new fire station, et cetera. But that's included in there. Medical insurance for Norfolk Public Schools is included in the town budget. Longevity for non-union employees for in the Norfolk Public Schools is included in the town budget, and then Medicare and county retirement, as well as some cherry sheet adjustments. So I wanted to put there, that question's been asked of me, I wanted to put that there for the general information of the community.
And just as a point of clarification, the reason for that distinction is that King Phillips, all of those expenses are included in their budget.
Yes. Okay. So, we'll say highlights of the fiscal year 25 budget. I think we made a lot of, difficult decisions. However, I think these are the highlights that the board needs to consider as part of this fiscal year 25 budget. Part of our recommendation is to rescind ARPA appropriation. I know the board, and we've always said, we've been interested in a grant writer, procurement specialist. There's a lot of funds and opportunities out there, and I know departments have said, this would be a great help. I think at this point, we reduced the fiscal year 24 appropriation for the last budget. I think at this point, particularly where we're getting with regulations in terms of using ARPA funds, it's prudent to probably just eliminate that position. So that would engender about $195,000 over the proposed use of those ARPA funds. We would use those funds to balance the budget this year. Making two recommended positions being restored from the fiscal year 24 budget reductions. One would be the DPW grounds position. I think the board is very well aware. We've heard, a lot of complaints and demands from, the community members, our departments, recreation, about, some of our grounds. And so one of the proposal is restoring that grounds position for the fiscal year 25 budget. The other proposal would be to restore the children's librarian position that was reduced in the fiscal year 24 budget. What we're proposing for that position, however, is to hire in January, so it still would be frozen for another 6 months. I'll have Sarah come in and talk to you about why that's important, as well as I'll have Blair talk about the DPW grounds position. The way that we were able to sort of come to that proposal is also realizing some further reductions in departmental budgets. When you look at the budget summary sheets, you'll probably see DPW overall growth is, it's under 1%. Library is about 1 point something percent as well. So you're not seeing large growth in there. There's further reductions that we had to make to sort of come to this proposal. This is something I'll talk to the board about as we move through these slides.
May I go back before we turn the page?
Yeah.
On the grant writer position, I absolutely understand the reasoning behind the elimination of that position. I wonder if there are opportunities for that position to be a shared position with Rentham, Plainville, Medway, Millis, where we could partner with them, because I think the thing that piques my interest is when we went to the MMA conference, they talked about all these grant opportunities that are out there, and there's Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren said, make hay while the sun is shining, and the sun is shining right now, there's hay to be made. And so I wonder if that is something we could think about in a different way and still have some significant budget savings, but partner with communities that are in the same position that we're in terms of trying to balance their budgets.
Right. That's a great suggestion. I've spoken with my colleagues in some of those communities, particularly Rentham, Franklin. We've also spoken with Norfolk Public Schools because they do have some sort of grant specialists. We're looking at a variety of things because I do agree with the board. It's very prudent that we have as much bandwidth and are as aggressive as possible in getting grants. I think a piece of this is just the select board office working as hard as we can. Kate and I are looking at doing some things our own self to try to help with this process too, but we're looking at all options there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The last bullet point of that highlights was overall town budget increase of 3.5%. I do want to highlight one aspect of this, and I think this is part of what's going to feed into, some of the decisions and some of the highlights for the board to consider. If you exclude education, if you exclude fixed costs, obviously health and different things like that, debt service, because it's a rolling debt service, and the MEC assessment and elections, because these are the final, MEC assessment, this is the final year, you'll see that large increase. And elections is based on how many elections we have in a year. You have overall town budget growth of 1.72%. I don't know if that's going to be feasible moving forward. That's a challenge. Particularly a challenge when we're looking at how much free cash we're utilizing to balance the budget. I know the board remembers my budget memo essentially asked departments to do their best to do 3% overall growth. That includes salaries and expenses. I want to thank all of our departments. I want to thank Todd and our finance team. We, in a large part, did that. Right. If you look through that budget summary sheet, a lot of departments under 3% or a lot of things are salary guides. Right. You have a 4% increase on salaries, but 1.72% overall town budget growth is that's not sustainable in the future. But we were able to do that this year. So as we go to the next slide, please, Amanda. I think the budget climate continues to be difficult. Many of the requests for expansion or restoration of positions were removed. We couldn't do it this year. There was a lot of good reasoning for them, and I want you to hear them directly from departments. I want you to hear what some of the challenges are, how they've been able to navigate some of the changes. But overall 3.5% growth based on what I'm hearing from my colleague in Norfolk Public Schools. And for the town, when you look at 1.72%, I think that's not going to be feasible in the forthcoming years. So we're going to have some difficult decisions and difficult conversations. I think this is sort of aligns with what we were discussing earlier. You know, there's a lot of different projects coming down the line for the town as well, so we have to keep that all in mind. We have to look at it holistically in making some of these decisions. As Todd and I always say, you know, we're always going to highlight the amount of ARPA and free cash and one-time sources of funds that we utilize. When you account for ARPA and free cash, but also account for the Special Education Stabilization Fund, we're using about $926,000 in one-time sources of funds. It's lower than the preceding year, but it's still a lot of money. It's almost $1 million in one-time sources of funds that we're utilizing. And as a reminder for the board, the Special Education Stabilization Funds, the school committee has to vote to utilize those funds, and the select board. I spoke with Ingrid, she believes that after their public hearing in March, they will vote in April to utilize that fund as well. So we would probably schedule something for the board then as well.
Will there be a contingency in case a student moves in who requires?
So this was one of the other challenges. There's $250,000 in the Special Education Stabilization. So we're going to still leave $125,000 just in case for that very purpose. Ingrid, I think, will speak even more so why she was very, adamant that there was a little bit of a buffer just in case. So yes, there's about $125,000 left in case there's a student that emerges for the town. So the next slide are some of the decisions for the select board. I've presented, it's a little different than last year because last year there was just a lot going on. There was a lot of decisions in terms of position reductions, et cetera. I presented the board a proposed balanced budget, but there are still some decisions we have to make. Do need the board to say, hey, we do think reappropriating the 195 from the grant writer position makes sense, because that is a board decision. The restoration of those positions, I think you want to hear from the departments about those, because restoring the grounds position, the children's librarian position, that equates to about $70,000. And that's $70,000 in this fiscal year, but that's $70,000 less in free cash that we would be used to balance the budget. It's a decision for the board. I think, you should give guidance on that, whether you think that's a prudent recommendation to restore those positions. Obviously, you have to decide if you do agree with utilizing the Special Education Stabilization funds as well. And then the proposed increases that our departments are going to present to you to increase some revenue. There'll be building, there'll be planning, there will be DPW. There's going to be an article for the town clerk to remove their fees out of the bylaws. It's a weird one. A long time ago, we inserted town clerk fees into the bylaw, so we want to have an article to remove that. But Carol, our town clerk, is going to have some recommendations for fees increases in the town clerk's office as well. And then the final slide is just a overview of the historical budgets. It gives you some identifications of when Prop 2.5 overrides were presented to the town and what their results were. I did ask Todd to emphasize that these include exempt debt, so it's not just operating debt, but I think that's important for people to know, moving forward with the budget. That's my PowerPoint presentation for the board. The plan is just like we had with Rich coming tonight. The next board meeting, I'm going to have some departments come before you talk about their budgets. I'm going to try to get library and DPW at the minimum, so you have some a reason why we thought it was prudent to take a look at those positions. But every department will appear before the board to talk about their budget this year. And that's my presentation to you all. I don't know if you have any questions, thoughts.
Thank you, Justin. That was a lot of information, and we appreciate you putting it all together, as well as all of the department heads for everything that they did to bridge some of these gaps that we saw coming down the pike, but still they were very difficult to bridge. So thank you so much for putting this together and presenting us with a balanced budget. I do know that we're probably going to want to take this and marinate for a little while with it before we come back with some more in-depth questions, but I did want to open it up to the board for any general high-level questions that you had associated to the presentation Justin just made. Jim?
No, not really tonight. No. I've had a chance to go through this with Justin, though. And I will comment, I think you've done an excellent job on this, Justin. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Anita?
I guess I need to marinate it on, you, I should echo first what Jim is saying. Excellent job. Thank you very much. It was difficult. It wasn't an easy job, and it wasn't an easy job for your group, but also for all the departments, so I understand that. I wonder if there is, like, it seems like this, like you said so clearly, this isn't sustainable. And so what are, I guess, I look forward to conversations where we talk about what are our options then to address the lack of sustainability in that. It seems like adjusting our fees to make them more competitive with our, not competitive, but to make them more reasonable with our surrounding towns is a short-term shot in the arm, but maybe not a long-term solution. And so I think that seems like a conversation that needs to be had.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Some of these changes, they're largely local receipt changes, and there's only so much that we can do as a town. They're not going to bridge the gap, right? They will make a difference, but they won't bridge this gap. You're absolutely right. Part of that discussion was we did work with the Collins Center on a forecast. They couldn't make it for this tonight's meeting, but they will attend March 19th, because I think that's where we have some of those other discussions, like how do we look at this moving forward? But that's what our intent will be for
Thank
the
you.
next meeting as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So we look forward to having the individual departments come to answer some questions. I imagine that as we go through some of the documentation and numbers you presented, we'll have some questions that'll come up that we'll address as we go down this path. But this is a much better jumping off point than we were at 2 weeks ago. So thank you so much.
No worries.
Our next item this evening is to go into a tri-county discussion, Justin.
So I'm going to give this a very high-level discussion. I want to thank our partner Karen McGuire at Tri-County. I asked Karen to sort of give us a high-level picture of what the town's budget impact would be regarding the Tri-County school project. They made a quick turnaround, and so in your packet, there's some information about what this project looks like. I gave you the previous presentation where the impact to the town because of this project was around $520,000 a year. Tri-County was able to get some additional funds from the state in MSBA funds, about $18 million. And so you have in your packet, and we have to temper this. This is a picture of how it looks now. There's a lot of variables. These are based on interest rates. These are based on students, a lot of different things. But I wanted to give the board some information because I think it leads to what the decision would be in terms of whether we schedule a debt exclusion vote, et cetera. So with that additional funding, the impact to the town is around, instead of $520,000, it's going to be in $371 and then $420. They're looking at a complicated way to bond this out. So it's lower for the town, but it's still a significant amount that we cannot fund within our operating budget. So I've spoken with our town clerk, and one of the things that I think the board needs to stew on is whether they think it's prudent to schedule a debt exclusion ballot vote during our annual town election. And the reason why I'm recommending to the board that they do consider it is because if you schedule that vote during the town, we already have election scheduled. There wouldn't be any additional costs. We have the ballot language prepared. I had bond counsel take a look at it. We had town council look at it. You have information from Carol saying that she's fine with us moving forward with it, and we just need to make a decision 35 days prior to the election. So if the select board were to determine that we would go that route, you would need to make that decision at your next select board meeting, because in April it would be too late. So I wanted to give you that information because I think it's something that I would like to see if the board thinks is prudent to at least see that language and have a discussion at the next select board meeting about whether to put that ballot election language on our annual town election, or does the board think, they want to wait on it? I think that's a discussion you should have, but I didn't want it to be too late for you to make that determination either. So.
Well, speaking from my perspective, although the parameters of the law itself have us within an appropriate range to be able to make that decision, I don't believe that this is enough lead time for us to give the community to be able to assess and appropriately vote on something like this. In my mind, I had envisioned that we would be able to lay out not only our plan for being able to take a debt exclusion for Tri-County, but also to intertwine that into some of the upcoming capital expenditures that we had coming down the pike, identify if there was going to be any additional impact from other things that would have already been approved, like the fire station, and then be able to present that in a cohesive package to identify what the overall net impact would be to an individual. I don't think we can do that for the second week of May of this year,
Right.
personally. Now, you can convince me and tell me I'm wrong, but from where I sit, I feel like we would run into a lot of perspective that we're rushing this. And when it comes to, if there's one thing we've learned, when it comes to these types of debt exclusion requests, we don't want to have it come in with the perception of being rushed. Now, I'm open to changing my mind based on other feedback and maybe from my fellow members of the board, but that's my initial reaction.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have to convince two of us. I agree with what Kevin said. I think it is premature to go forward in this May. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions. I'd be repeating what you said.
Yep.
I don't think there's a need to do that. So, I would not support going forward with this May meeting.
And I have to agree with my board members. I feel like I can see the appeal of it. Like it helps us solve some problems and gives us a little bit of a cushion, and it's something that we need to do. But I also, when you were first talking about it, I thought, I wonder where the public appetite is, and there isn't. I just even imagine like just going home in my neighborhood and having the conversation.
Yep.
People are going to say, "What? What do you mean that we haven't laid the groundwork for it?" And so I'm concerned that it would not be successful, and then it would feel. And when you're putting something forward that you're not sure it's, not that you can ever be sure, but then it feels almost, even though that's not the way it is, it feels irresponsible. Like we didn't, what do you mean you need this? We don't know. So I think we do need to do the work behind that needs to happen in order to help the community understand.
Justin, how much more would it cost to execute a standalone election as opposed to piggybacking on an existing election? Is it somewhere in the range of?
It's about $15,000.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just want to give the board this. I wasn't recommending that we do it either. I want to give the board the option.
Right.
And that's your decision. Either way, and I actually think that what you all said makes sense. Because there's going to be another crack at it later. But I wanted to give the board that option just because I think as you move further down in the year, you're probably going to have some other things that you're going to consider, right? And so it may pose some challenge, but I wanted to at least give you that information so you could say that.
You're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Your job is to give us the options and
Yeah.
present the different considerations without judgment.
Yeah.
So you're doing the right thing. But just to expand a little bit on what Kevin said, if you're going to, we haven't had a situation like this in a while in Norfolk, because in some respects you could almost look at this as an operational consideration as opposed to a debt exclusion. I mean, it really
Could
is. in
consider
some
that,
respects.
actually, yeah.
If I just again, I think we have an obligation to expand our vision on this beyond just what we're doing today. And Kevin said it eloquently. We need to look at the longer term implications of what other issues may be before us. To present this in a piecemeal fashion is usually a disaster.
Yeah.
If the first makes it, the second will fail, then or take your pick. It's usually rarely works, and I don't think it's fair to the voter. We have an obligation, I think, to look at this longer term, 3, 4, 5 years in realistic views as to what we might be facing, and try to have people understand as best we can what the longer term view is of all of these capital projects that may or may not come. I mean, we're looking at a roof at King Philip in the next 5 or 6 years. All of those things need to be packaged into a sort of a holistic presentation of what the needs are of our community, so that people can make better judgments as to where they want those dollars to go. Tri-County's a given. It's here to stay. We got to pay for it. How we do it and how we go about it, I think, is our job. We've got to figure that out. But I thank you for bringing it forward, because that's what you should do. And I'm echoing what Kevin said. We're being redundant here, but I do think this requires a more holistic view of this.
And I wonder again if there's an opportunity in this, because I think what we're all saying is that you can't just dig the hole and put the tree in. Like, we need to put the seed, water, fertilize, and really understand that. But in getting ready to do that, it might be appropriate to include, now our newsletter is going to be 8 pages long, but to say, what's going on with Tri-County, so people don't feel so punched in the belly by it. Like, what do you mean Tri-County is building? So just like a little Tri-County update and just a couple sentences to have people to start thinking about, like, oh, they're building a new school? Then if they even knew that, then that starts to set the stage for people thinking. So maybe there's an opportunity in having this conversation now to say, let's either put it on our website or a link to want to see what's happening, just to start having people be aware that this is going to affect our town, and it's super exciting, and it's also expensive. As exciting things oftentimes are.
And I will admit, I haven't given up on all alternative opportunities on how to fund this. So I think realistically, you're probably in a better neighborhood than I'm residing right now on that question, but I haven't given up.
I think you have fellow board members who are like that as well. Just as a quick update in regards to Tri-County as well, though, for the board, next few weeks, we haven't had sort of a communal discussion in some time. Karen will meet with our member communities, and we'll get another update. I will relay that information to the board, but also get a good sense from our town administrators and our fellow colleagues what they're looking at doing, because I know some of them are taking that sort of approach too, and there might be some chance to do some collaboration, right? So we can get messaging out holistically and together. So I agree. The board has laid out some good reasons for moving forward, so I have my direction there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. That brings us to our next agenda item this evening, which is our general update, starting with our town administrator updates. Justin?
Yes, in the board's packet, you just have an image that regarding Highland Lake, so I want to give a quick update on Highland Lake. I know we had spoken with all the board members, and we had briefly talked about, some of the flooding within town. And the Highland Lake Dam and the Highland Lake was one area where there was quite a bit of concern and issues there. There's a significant amount of debris there. So I did want to update the board. Last week, Friday, the Norfolk County Mosquito Control came out. They got in some unique little boats called bat boats, and they went out and cleared a significant amount of debris for the town. You can see the before picture, you can see the after picture. It's a significant amount. This truly was a collaborative effort on so many people's accounts. Mosquito Control, Department of Corrections, Andy Bakanowski utilizing some of his Department of Corrections connections, DPW and Conservation Commission. It was really all hands on deck. We made a significant amount of headway with the debris at the Highland Lake. And I've gotten a commitment from Mosquito Control, as we get through the season and hopefully some of that water recedes a bit. We're going to take a look at some of the lower culverts as well there too, because there's some debris there too. So I just want to give the board a quick update on that, because I know that was a concern of the board and
Do we know who owns the dam?
yes, it's a privately owned dam.
I know it is. Do we know who it is?
Yes.
Okay.
You do. And they made and they worked with us as well, because it's not only the Highland Lake, but the dam was of issue. They did some work on their end of things, so the town had to do some work on their end as well, and we'll continue to monitor it and make effort there. That's it.
Thank you, Justin. One select board general update, just that, as we finish out our Super Tuesday election period, polls closed about 50 minutes ago, so we should be tabulating results now. We now turn our attention to our local election coming up in the first week of May. So for those that are interested in serving in a capacity here in the community, I believe our town clerk is issuing nomination forms up until March 18th, and all nomination forms are due back on March 20th. So the clock is ticking. If you are interested in running for one of these roles, get out and get those signatures and make sure they're back in by the 20th. Any other updates from the board?
No, I'm good, thanks.
No?
All right, so let's move on to our next item this evening, which is the report of the warrants. I will take a motion to approve.
I move to approve the warrant as printed in the agenda.
Second.
Hearing a second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 And that is a unanimous vote. Thank you. And our final item this evening is the approval of minutes. Do we have minutes to approve? We do not. In that case, we just did our final from the meeting. Justin, anything else for us this evening?
That's it, Mr. Chair.
Fantastic. Jim?
Nope, good, sir.
Anita?
Nothing?
In that case, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Hearing a second. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.